Picture a ledger book, small, leather-bound, the kind a shopkeeper might use to track inventory, the kind you'd find on any respectable desk in any respectable office in any American city in 1893. Now imagine that ledger contains your name, and next to your name, a number, and that number, no matter how hard you work, no matter how many nights pass, no matter how much you give, never goes down, it only ever goes up. That's where we're starting tonight. Not with the sword, not with a battlefield, not with a plague or a war or a natural disaster. We're starting with ink on paper, with a quiet, domestic little book kept by a well-dressed woman in a house on South Dearborn Street in Chicago, Illinois, in the last years of the 19th century. Because sometimes the most brutal traps in history are the ones that look, at first glance, like a hand being extended to help you. Chicago in 1893 is one of the strangest cities on earth. In April, they're still cleaning up after the construction of the world's Columbian Exposition, the White City, the most elaborate World's Fair in American history, built on 400 acres of marshland on the south side of the city in less than 2 years. By May, 27 million people will pass through its gates. 27 million. That's roughly equal to the entire population of the United States just 50 years earlier. The city smells like the future and the stockyards at the same time. That's the only way to describe it. To the north, you've got Prairie Avenue, where the Pullman family and the McCormick family and the Armour family are building houses that would embarrass European nobility. To the south and west, you've got Union Stockyards, where 40,000 cattle and hogs and sheep arrive every single day to be processed by men and women working 12-hour shifts in conditions that Upton Sinclair will spend an entire novel trying to describe. And in between, in the grid of streets that Chicagoans call the First Ward, the Levee District, the Vice District, the Sporting Life, you've got something else entirely. You've got the houses. They're not hard to find if you know what you're looking for. Plain brick exteriors, curtained windows even in the afternoon, a small red lamp above some of them, though many don't bother. The neighbours know, the police know, the aldermen know, they're on the payroll, everybody knows. Inside, women are working. And somewhere in the back room of almost every one of those establishments there is a ledger with your name in it and a number that grows. So I make these history stories, and honestly I'm never entirely sure if you're listening to learn or if you're listening because you want a human voice in the dark to remind you that the world has always been complicated and frightening, and somehow people have always gotten through it anyway. Either way, I'm glad you're here. Get comfortable. Pull something warm around you. Here we go. Your eyes open to darkness. For a moment, a half second, maybe less, you've forgotten where you are. Then it hits you. Not a smell, not this time. A sound. A sound you've been hearing every night for 3 weeks now. The sound that has replaced the wind in the cornfields and the creak of the farmhouse floor. The sound that tells you exactly where you are and what has happened to your life. It's piano music. Not the good kind. Not the Sunday morning kind your mother played. Hymns with her back straight and her ankles crossed. This is tinny and fast and slightly off-key. The notes a little too close together, a little too insistent, like the pianist knows the job is to keep people from thinking clearly and is very good at it. Below you, the house is awake. The house is always awake. You're lying on a narrow bed in a room that's about the size of the root cellar back home, 8 feet wide, 10 feet long, a window the size of a dinner plate looking out at a brick wall 3 feet away. The mattress is stuffed with something that used to be straw and is now mostly compressed mystery. The wallpaper, blue roses once, you can still see the pattern if you look close, is peeling at the corners and stained in places you try not to examine. Your name is Emma Hartley. You're 19 years old. You arrived in Chicago 6 weeks ago on the Chicago and Northwestern Railway from Waukesha County, Wisconsin, with $14 in a cloth purse sewn into your undergarments, a letter of reference from your county pastor, and a name written on a piece of paper, the name of an employment agency. Your father gave it to you. Your mother cried. Your brother, who is 12, and thought Chicago sounded like the greatest adventure in the history of the world, asked you to bring him back a souvenir from the fair. You haven't been to the fair. You haven't been anywhere. Somewhere in this house, in a room on the ground floor that smells of cedar and lavender, and something else underneath, something metallic and faintly sweet that you've decided not to think about, there is a ledger. In that ledger, next to your name, the current figure is $47.30. You came here with 14. Welcome to Chicago, Illinois. 1893. The fastest growing city in the world. The city Carl Sandburg hasn't written about yet, but will. The city of big shoulders. The city that works. The hog butcher for the world. Population 1.1 million and growing by the tens of thousands every year. They're arriving from everywhere. From Poland and Bohemia and Italy and Russia. Streaming through the train stations with everything they own in bundles and trunks. Filling the boarding houses of the west side and the south side. Packing into neighbourhoods so dense that social workers will later count 16 people in a 2-room apartment and call it typical. From the American countryside too, from Wisconsin and Iowa and Indiana, from the small towns and the farms where the work is bone grinding and the money is unreliable and the winters seem to last 10 months out of 12. Young men heading for the factories and the stockyards, young women heading for domestic service mostly. That's the respectable option. Cook, housekeeper, laundress, lady's maid. There are 60,000 domestic servants in Chicago in 1893. 60,000 women whose entire working lives take place inside someone else's house. It's hard work, long hours, 6 days a week, sometimes 7. You live in your employer's home, which means you're never really off duty. You sleep in a room that's usually smaller than the one you grew up in, eat what's left after the family is done, and spend your one free afternoon a week walking around a city that mostly regards you as furniture that happens to move. But it's honest, and it's safe, and it's what your pastor put in his letter of reference. Emma Hartley, a girl of good character, suitable for domestic employment in a Christian household. The employment agencies, they called them intelligence offices then, which sounds impressive and is the opposite, are where you go to find that placement. There are hundreds of them in Chicago. Most are legitimate. A woman comes in, pays a small fee, her name goes into a book, and a few days later someone sends her to a household on the North Shore or Prairie Avenue, or out in Evanston, where she spends the next several years dusting bookshelves and learning which fork goes on the left. Some are not legitimate, and in 1893, with 27 million people pouring into the city for the World's Fair, the city is absolutely full of young women from the countryside, arriving alone with small amounts of money and large amounts of hope, and absolutely no idea which agencies are which. This is not a story about luck. The employment agency where your story begins is called the Western Ladies Employment Bureau. It operates out of a storefront on State Street between a tailor and a druggist. The window says positions for domestic and household girls, guaranteed placements. All references checked. There is a potted fern in the window. The fern is fake, but it looks real from the street, which is the most important thing. When you walked in, your bag still damp from the rain that was falling when you stepped off the train. The woman behind the desk was maybe 45, plump, immaculately dressed in dark blue wool, her hair pinned up with what looked like tortoiseshell combs. She had kind eyes. That's the thing you remember. She had kind eyes, and she called you dear, and she offered you a chair and a cup of tea, and she listened to your whole story. The farm, your father's bad knee, the need to send money home, with an expression of genuine sympathy. Her name was Mrs. Eloise Tremaine. That's not her real name, but it's the one she used. She told you that domestic placements were in very high demand right now, with the fair in town, and that she had just the position for a girl of your character, a household on the south side, respectable family, cook needed, $2 a week plus room and board. You said yes. She said there would be a small placement fee, standard practice, $2. You said yes. She said because the position started immediately, and the household required you to arrive properly attired, she could advance you the cost of a suitable dress. Nothing fancy, just what were needed for the job. She'd deduct it from your first month's wages. Another $3. You said yes. She said there'd also be a small charge for the omnibus fare to get you to the south side. 50 cents. You said yes. And then a woman appeared from a back room to take you to the omnibus, and you picked up your bag, and you followed her out the door, and you did not notice that Mrs. Tremaine did not write down an address, did not give you a card, did not provide any paperwork at all except for a small receipt for your placement fee, which listed no employer's name and no location except Southside. You were tired. You were 24 hours off a train. The city was enormous and loud and smelled of coal smoke and horse dung and something faintly sweet and rotten from the direction of the stockyards. The woman walking beside you was brisk and competent and moving with the confidence of someone who knows exactly where she's going. You followed. That's the first thing they count on, that you'll follow. The house is on South Dearborn Street near the intersection with Custom House Place. You will later learn that Custom House Place is one of the most notorious streets in the United States, that it has been the subject of temperance sermons, newspaper investigations, and at least 3 municipal reform campaigns that changed nothing. That the First Ward Democratic Organization, run by 2 aldermen named Michael Kenner and John Coughlin, known respectively as Hinky Dink and Bathhouse John, operates partly on the protection fees collected from every establishment on streets exactly like this one. But you don't know that. Not yet. What you know, standing on the pavement outside with your bag in your hand and the September wind coming in off Lake Michigan, is that the house looks perfectly ordinary. Brick. 3 stories. A short flight of steps up to the front door. Clean curtains in the windows. The woman who brought you here knocks twice and then opens the door without waiting for an answer. That's the first detail that should tell you something. People don't knock on their employer's door and then just walk in. But you're tired. Inside, the smell hits you. Perfume first. Heavy and floral, gardenia, and something underneath it, musky and close. Then tobacco, then whiskey. And underneath all of that, beneath the perfume and the smoke, something that your 19-year-old nose from Waukesha County, Wisconsin, cannot identify, but that your body identifies for you, makes the small hairs on your arms rise beneath your sleeve. The hallway is dim, red wallpaper, dark wood, an umbrella stand shaped like a bear, a mirror with a gilded frame, a gaslight in a frosted globe casting everything in amber. And then she comes down the stairs, Madame Clara Walsh. She's 53 years old and looks 45, medium height, corseted to an architecture that suggests great effort. Her dress is dark green silk, expensively made, slightly ostentatious in a way that says I know what expensive looks like and I have it. Her hair is dark with threads of grey she hasn't bothered to disguise. Her hands, when she extends one to you, are soft. She moisturizes. She is the best kept woman you have ever seen up close. She looks at you the way a person looks at something they're evaluating for purchase. Not unkindly, that's what you'll remember later. She wasn't cruel about it. She was professional. "Emma," she says, and you're briefly startled that she knows your name. "Welcome. You must be exhausted. Come in. We'll get you settled." The woman who brought you here has already disappeared, and you follow Madame Walsh down the hallway, your bag in your hand, the piano somewhere above you beginning to play. The first night, you sleep. That's all. You're so exhausted from the train and the city and the agency that when Clara Walsh shows you to the small room on the 3rd floor and says there'll be time for explanations in the morning, you simply sit on the edge of the bed and feel the mattress, springs, and look at the peeling wallpaper and fall asleep before you've properly decided to. You don't hear the piano stop, which doesn't happen until nearly 4 in the morning. You don't hear the voices on the stairs, the laughter sometimes, the arguing occasionally. You sleep like a stone dropped into deep water. The morning is when it starts. You wake to light coming through the small window. Not sunlight exactly, more like the suggestion of light filtered through Chicago air in September, which carries enough particulate matter to give the dawn a distinctly grey industrial quality. Smoke from the stockyards, coal from the furnaces, dust from the streets. Chicago mornings have a texture to them, a weight. Your mouth tastes of the journey, and your back aches from the springs in the mattress, and for exactly 2 seconds you're still in Wisconsin, still home, and then your eyes find the peeling wallpaper and the 2-second grace period ends. You sit up. On the small table beside the bed, a table you didn't notice last night, there is a glass of water. Someone came in while you slept and left a glass of water. That detail unnerves you more than anything else so far. Downstairs you can hear movement, something being washed, a door opening and closing, the ordinary sounds of a house beginning its morning. You stand. The floor is cold through your stockings. You find your bag, take out your things, make yourself as presentable as you can without a proper wash basin. There is no wash basin in this room, and go looking for someone to explain what is happening. The hallway outside your door is empty. 3 other doors, all closed. The stairs going down. You go down. The ground floor is different in daylight, bigger than it seemed last night. The red wallpaper is brighter, almost cheerful. There's a sitting room with a horsehair sofa and several chairs with embroidered cushions and a piano. The piano you heard, a handsome upright walnut instrument against the far wall, a glass cabinet in the corner with bottles in it, a rug that cost more than your father spent on farming equipment last year. In the dining room at the back, 4 women are eating breakfast. They are, you will realize later, between 20 and 27 years old. They are wearing morning wrappers, soft robes in various states of wear, and they look like people who have not slept long enough. Their faces are still soft with it. their movements a little slow. One of them looks up when you appear in the doorway. She is maybe 22, dark hair pinned loosely, a face that would be pretty on more sleep. Her name is Josephine Reardon, and she came here from County Cork by way of Boston, and she has been in this house for 14 months, and her ledger balance is $62. She looks at you with an expression you will not understand until later. It is not quite pity. It is the expression of someone who remembers a feeling very clearly and is watching someone else experience it for the first time. "Sit down," she says. "There's oatmeal." Madame Clara Walsh comes down at 9. She is dressed by then, hair up, a plain cotton morning dress, a ledger book under her arm. She sits across from you at the table, sets the ledger book between you, folds her hands on top of it, and she explains. This is not, she says, a domestic service placement in the way you perhaps expected. She says this evenly, not apologetically, not cruelly, the way a banker explains interest rates, a professional tone. This is simply the situation tone. The house, she explains, is an establishment of a certain kind. You are here because the Western Ladies Employment Bureau is associated with her business. Girls arriving in the city, without contacts, without resources, are better off here than trying to navigate a city that would chew them up and spit them out regardless. She provides room and board. She provides clothing. She provides protection. And here she means something specific by the word, which you will learn from the police, from the aldermen, from the men who are worse than the men who come here. In return, you work for her. You know what the work is. You've known since you walked through the door last night and your body told you with that rising of hair on your arms. You knew, and you pushed the knowing away and slept. And now, here it is, across the table from you, folded into perfectly measured sentences. You say you want to leave. Clara Walsh nods. Of course, she says. You're free to leave at any time. You begin to stand up. However, she says. She opens the ledger. Your name is on a page near the front. Emma Hartley, Wisconsin. Date of arrival, September 14th, 1893. The figure next to your name is $23.80. Placement fee to Western Ladies Bureau, $2. Transportation, 50 cents. Advance on dress, $3. First week's room and board, $4. Advance on clothing inventory. She turns the ledger to show you a list. Each item priced. Chemises, 2. Corset, 1. Stockings, 4 pairs. Slippers, 1 pair. Dress, evening, 1. Dress, afternoon, 1. The total for clothing is $14.30, $23.80. Due immediately upon departure. You have at the moment $11.60 in the cloth purse sewn into your undergarments, because the rest was the placement fee and the bus fare. You don't have $23.80. Clara Walsh watches your face while you do the arithmetic. She is not unkind about it. She explains that you can work off the debt. You will receive a percentage of your earnings. Room and board will be $4 per week, billed against your account. Clothing will be maintained and billed at cost. If you work diligently, she says, you should be free and clear within, she pauses, a small pause, calibrated, within a reasonable period. How long, you ask? She looks at you for a moment. That depends, she says, on you. And she closes the ledger. I need to stop here for a moment and explain something about how this system worked. Because it's important, and because the mechanics of it are more sophisticated and more vicious than they might appear at first glance. The debt trap system in 1890s brothels, the historians who've studied this call it a form of debt peonage, which is a technical term for a practice that was illegal for sharecroppers in the South after the Civil War, but somehow nobody applied the same legal reasoning to women in the Levee District of Chicago, is brilliant in its structural simplicity. You arrive owing money, you earn money, but not enough, because every week new debts are added. Room and board, $4. That is not a crazy price in 1893 Chicago. A working man might pay $2 a week for a boarding house room, $1.50 for meals. But you're not paying boarding house rates. You're paying Clara Walsh's rates. And Clara Walsh has decided that your room and board is worth $4, which she has decided because she can, because there's no negotiating it, because it goes in the ledger, and the ledger is the law in this house. Clothing. This is where it gets elegant in its cruelty. You need to look a certain way. This is the business. The clothes required for the business are expensive. Silks, satins, things that working women don't wear and don't own. Clara provides them. She charges you for them. She charges you full retail plus what she calls a convenience fee, which adds another 20 to 30%. The dress you're wearing tonight cost her $6 from a wholesale house on Wabash Avenue. She charges you $9.50. Fines. This is the part that takes the longest to see clearly, because the fines seem reasonable when they are explained. Fines for breaking things. A mirror, a glass, a piece of furniture. Fines for being late, for being improperly dressed, for failing to follow certain house rules. Fines for being sick, because when you're sick, you're not working, and when you're not working, you're still consuming room and board. And the difference between what you should have earned and what you actually earned is, in Clara Walsh's bookkeeping, your fault. These fines are small individually. 25 cents for a broken glass, 50 cents for being an hour late to the downstairs parlour, $1 for a complaint from a customer. Small individually, but they accumulate, and they are entirely at Clara Walsh's discretion. This is the architecture of the trap. The debt you came in with is real. The ongoing charges are real. She does feed you, she does clothe you. The room is small, but it exists. But the fines are arbitrary, the rates are inflated, and critically, the percentage of your earnings that you actually receive is carefully calibrated, so that even in a good week, even if you work every night, even if you're the most popular girl in the house, so you're still falling slightly behind, not dramatically behind. That would cause panic. That would cause running. That would create scenes and problems and exactly the kind of disorder that Clara Walsh's careful business does not have time for. Just slightly behind. Just enough that the number in the ledger, when she shows it to you on Friday mornings at the breakfast table, is always a little higher than it was the Friday before. The Vice Commission of Chicago, a group of investigators who in 1910 will produce a report called The Social Evil in Chicago that will become one of the most important documents in American reform history, will describe this system precisely. They will note that the average inmate of a Levee house, as they call her, earns approximately $400 a year and pays out $450 to $600 annually in house charges. The math never works. That's the point. The math was never designed to work. The house has 8 women in it when you arrive. By October there are 10. You know their names within a week because the house is small enough that you can't avoid each other, and because shared predicament creates a certain efficiency and intimacy. Not deep intimacy, not the kind that has time to develop into something resembling friendship before it calculates the risk of caring too much, but a working knowledge of one another that is its own kind of closeness. Josephine Reardon, from Cork by way of Boston. 22, 14 months here, $62 in the ledger. She arrived through a different agency, one on South Clark Street, that promised her waitressing work in a restaurant near the fair. She has a brother somewhere in Boston she hasn't written to in 8 months because she doesn't know what she would say. Nell Bradshaw, from downstate Illinois, 20. She came with her actual name and her actual plan. She knew what kind of house this was. She'd heard about it from a girl back home who'd been here and come back with money. Nell is practical in a way that unsettles you a little. She does the math every week with the same focus other girls bring to prayer. She's currently $41 in debt, and she is furious about it in a cold, quiet way that she directs entirely inward. Margaret, she doesn't give a last name. You'll learn later that none of the older girls give last names to new arrivals. Not right away. It's not distrust exactly, but caution. Margaret is 27, pale, slight, a cough she's had since January that nobody mentions. She's been here 3 years. You don't ask what her ledger says. Something about the way Josephine's face goes careful when Margaret's name comes up tells you it's not a number you want to know. Rose Kaplan, from the Russian Pale of Settlement, by way of the west side of Chicago, 18 years old and the youngest in the house, and somehow, despite this, the most competent. She speaks 4 languages. She was brought here by a man she knew from the neighborhood who told her family he was connecting her with respectable employment and took a finder's fee from Clara Walsh for doing it. She knows exactly what has happened to her and she does not cry about it, which makes her look harder than she is. In the evenings before the house opens for business, when the girls have a few hours and the gas is turned low, she teaches Josephine to read. And then there are the others, Anna, Cecilia, Dottie, and 2 more who are only here for a few weeks, and then gone to somewhere else or something else. Their names barely settled into your memory before they're replaced. This is your world now, the house on South Dearborn Street. The piano that starts at 8 and stops at 4. The ledger with your name in it. And the number that grows, the piano. You should know about the piano player because he is one of the only people in this story who's neither trapped nor trapping, and there is something clarifying about that. His name is James Delaney. He's 38. He plays piano 6 nights a week from 8 in the evening until 3 or 4 in the morning, and he is paid $3 a night, which is better money than most honest work in Chicago in 1893, and he knows it, and he has made a decision about what that knowledge costs him, and he lives with that decision in the way that people live with decisions they've made while not looking directly at them. He's a small man with large hands, pianist's hands, thick fingers that seem too big for the rest of him, but find the keys with a precision that is slightly eerie to watch. He plays everything. Ragtime, which is just becoming a thing, the syncopated rhythms arriving in Chicago from St. Louis and New Orleans, through musicians who play in the saloons and the vice houses before anywhere else. Popular songs. Stephen Foster, though Stephen Foster died in 1864, and his songs have by now been played so many times in establishments exactly like this one that they're part of the furniture. Dance music. Hymns, occasionally, if someone requests them, which people do more often than you'd expect. He does not socialize with the girls except in the most businesslike way. He nods when you pass him. He plays what you request if you tip him a nickel. If you're crying in the front hallway at 2 in the morning, and there are nights, there are always nights. He plays something quiet without drawing attention to the change in tempo, which is its own kind of kindness. His playing is the constant of the house. the thing that remains when everything else shifts. New girls arriving, old girls going. Clara Walsh's mood cycling with the business. The seasons changing outside the too small window. The piano plays on. Sometimes, in the half hour before the house opens and the gas is turned up and the girls come downstairs, he practices. Not the professional music, the working music. Something else. Chopin, you'll realise one evening when you've been here long enough to recognise things. Nocturnes. Pieces that belong somewhere else, in a concert hall or a parlour on Prairie Avenue, being played for people sitting still with their hands folded in their laps. He plays them perfectly, in an empty room, at 6:30 in the evening, and then at 7 he switches back to ragtime and the house comes to life around him. You never talk about the Chopin. Some things in this house survive by not being mentioned. The economics of the system become clear to you within 2 weeks, not in the abstract. You understood the abstract after that first morning at the breakfast table. Clara Walsh is not subtle about the structure of the debt. She has no reason to be. The debt is the mechanism of control, and the mechanism of control only works if you understand it. What becomes clear is the texture of it, the daily feel of the numbers. On Friday mornings, Clara does the accounts. She sits at the head of the breakfast table with the ledger, and she goes through each girl's week. What she earned, what was charged, what the balance is. The charging categories are, in roughly descending order of frequency, room and board, clothing maintenance, medicine. If you were sick, and medicine in 1893 means various things, some of which are harmless and some of which are not, and some of which are addictive, and all of which go in the ledger, fines, and what Clara calls incidentals, a category broad enough to contain almost anything. Your first Friday, 3 weeks after arrival, the accounting goes like this. Earnings for the week, $6.40. Your share. Clara takes 60%. You receive $40, $2.56. Room and board, $4. You're already behind. Before the first entry, you're already behind, because the difference between $2.56 and $4 is $1.44, and $1.44 goes into the debit column. Clothing. A pair of stockings, charged at 40 cents, because you got a run in the ones you were wearing and Clara decided they needed replacing. Real cost from the wholesale house, 12 cents. Incidentals. A 25-cent charge for a glass that you broke on Tuesday. You didn't break a glass on Tuesday. You were in your room on Tuesday with a headache you don't tell Clara about, because you already know what medicine will cost you. You say nothing about the 25 cents. Total change for the week. A net increase in your balance of $2.09. You came in at $23.80. You're leaving Friday morning's accounting at $25.89. You have worked a full week. You're $2 further in debt. You sit very still while Clara closes the ledger. The other girls file out. The oatmeal goes cold in your bowl. Rose Kaplan, passing behind your chair, rests her hand on your shoulder for exactly 2 seconds. She doesn't say anything. She doesn't need to. You know what you know. Let me tell you about Chicago. The real Chicago, not the World's Fair version. Not the white city with its classical columns and electric lights and display cases full of things the future was going to contain. The city that the girls in Clara Walsh's house actually inhabit. The Levee District sits roughly between 18th Street to the north and the railroad tracks to the south. Bounded on one side by the river and on the other by streets that are technically outside the district, but functionally part of it, because the money flows in the same direction. It is simultaneously one of the most famous neighborhoods in America and almost completely invisible to most of the people who live in Chicago. The newspapers write about it when something dramatic happens. A raid, a murder, a scandal involving someone respectable, and then go back to ignoring it. The girls don't go outside much. This is another part of the system, more subtle than the ledger, but just as effective. The outside world is presented as dangerous. Men on the street who don't have to follow Clara Walsh's rules. Police who might stop you, ask questions. Other madams whose establishments are less comfortable, where the protection is less reliable, where the violence is closer to the surface. There is truth in some of this. The streets of the Levee at night are genuinely not safe for women alone. There are men who are violent. There are police who are corrupt in ways that don't benefit the girls. There are other establishments, the dollar houses, the panel houses, the lowest rung of the system, where the conditions are significantly worse than on South Dearborn Street. Clara Walsh uses these truths strategically. She paints the outside world as a wilderness from which the house is a refuge, which is exactly backwards, and also, in a very specific and limited way, not entirely wrong. And the overlap between the true part and the untrue part is where the control happens. But sometimes you leave, rarely, briefly, under conditions that make the freedom theoretical. The errands. Clara sends girls on errands, small purchases, a specific kind of thread from the dry goods store on State Street, a prescription from the druggist, occasionally during the day, a delivery to another house, a bottle of something, a package of something, the nature of which you don't ask about. You go two at a time. That's the rule. Always two, never alone. And you go quickly and you come back, and Clara is never at the window watching you. That's not her style, surveillance through presence. But the city itself is the surveillance. Where would you go? You have no money except the small amount she gives you for the errand. You have no contacts in Chicago. You have no respectable address to give an employer. You have the clothes on your back, which are Clara Walsh's clothes, charged to your account. The debt follows you out the door. You can't outrun $25.89 in a city where a domestic servant earns $2 a week. The first time you go outside, it's October, 6 weeks after you arrived. Josephine goes with you. She's been here long enough to know the errand routes, the shortcuts, which blocks are fine at 10 in the morning and which ones aren't. The air outside the house smells like smoke and horse and lake water. After 6 weeks of gardenia perfume and cooking grease and the close recycled air of a small house with 10 people in it, the outdoor air of Chicago smells almost sweet, regardless of its actual composition. You stand on the front step for a moment longer than you need to. Josephine doesn't rush you. She's done this before. She knows what the first breath of outside air feels like after weeks of inside. "Come on," she says, not unkindly. The street is ordinary. That's what strikes you first. Ordinary people going about ordinary business. Men in dark coats with their hands in their pockets against the October wind. A woman with a basket heading toward the market. A boy selling newspapers on the corner, his voice high and insistent. Paper, Chicago Tribune, Morning Edition. The house is on a block with other houses. Some of them are the same as Clara's. The subtle signs, the lamps, the timing of when the curtains move. Once you know what to look for. Others are genuinely residential. A family with laundry on a line in the small yard behind. a man on his front steps reading, a child, maybe 4, sitting on the top step watching the street with the tremendous seriousness of very young children. The world has not changed while you were inside. This is somehow the strangest thing. 6 weeks of the house and the ledger and the piano, and out here the Tribune boy is still shouting, the laundry is still flapping, the 4-year-old is still watching the street with those enormous serious eyes. "Don't," Josephine says quietly, and you realise you've slowed almost to a stop. "I know, don't." You keep walking. The errand is to the druggist 4 blocks north on State Street. You're picking up a bottle of something. The prescription is in Josephine's pocket and she doesn't show it to you, which tells you it's one of the things you don't ask about. The druggist is a mild-looking man in a white coat who takes the prescription without reading it and goes to the back. The shop smells of camphor and licorice and something sharper underneath, medicinal. While you wait, you look at the street through the plate glass window. A newsstand, a shoe repair, a woman's hat shop with an elaborate window display, velvet and ostrich feathers and silk ribbons in colours that have specific names you've never learned, mauve and cerise and eau de Nil. The hat in the centre of the display is priced, according to a small card, at $4.50. You could buy one of those hats with what you earned last week, if you kept your earnings, if the room and board and the clothing and the incidentals and the debt that's been waiting for you since before you got here didn't already own everything you'd ever make in this house. You think about your father's knee, the reason you came here, the money you were supposed to be sending home. You have sent nothing. There has been nothing to send. The druggist comes back with a brown paper package, and Josephine pays him from the small amount Clara gave her for errands, and thanks him in the bright, neutral voice of someone conducting ordinary business. And then you're back out on the street with the wind and the smell of the lake. You walk back. You go inside. The door closes. The piano is already playing, warming up for the evening, running scales. There is something I want to tell you about the women who try to help, because this is not a story in which nothing changes and nobody resists and the system simply runs forever uncontested. It doesn't work that way. History never works that way. 14 blocks north and slightly west of Clara Walsh's house, on South Dearborn Street, in a neighbourhood called the Near West Side, in a building on the corner of Polk and Halstead, there is Hull House. You've probably heard of Hull House, Jane Addams, the Settlement House, the Nobel Peace Prize. It's a famous American institution now, and in 1893 it's already famous in a more local way. The place where college-educated women in long dark skirts go to live among the poor and provide services and document, endlessly, carefully, the conditions of Chicago's working class. Jane Addams is 33 in 1893. Small, precise, a slight spine condition that makes her carry herself very carefully, a voice that is quiet and direct and very difficult to argue with. She and her partner Ellen Gates Starr moved into the decaying Hull mansion in 1889, and they have spent the 4 years since then building something that is simultaneously a community centre and a document of everything wrong with industrial-era urban poverty. They know about the Levy. They have opinions about the Levy. Several of the women associated with Hull House, Florence Kelly, Julia Lathrop, Dr. Alice Hamilton, who is currently documenting lead poisoning in the stockyards, would rather level the Levee District than try to reform it. They also know, with the precision of people who have spent years watching, that you cannot simply level a district without addressing the conditions that create it, that the girls in those houses came from somewhere, that the somewhere is a combination of poverty and rural dislocation and immigration and a labour market that offers young women without education or connections almost nothing between domestic service and the options they are currently exercising. They run a lodging house on a nearby street, clean, safe for women in transit, women who need a place while they're looking for honest work. They run a labour bureau, a legitimate one, that actually checks employers and provides real placements. They are, in the winter of 1893, beginning to investigate the employment agencies. There is a woman at Hull House named Florence who is spending her days visiting agencies on State Street and Clark Street, and interviewing girls who've been sent to the wrong places, taking notes, building a report. She is building the case that will eventually, not yet, not for several more years, but eventually, lead to licensing requirements for employment agencies, to legal accountability, to the investigative journalism and reform legislation that will, by 1910, make what happened to you in September of 1893 somewhat harder to do. Not impossible, harder, but in October of 1893 you don't know about Hull House, or if you do, it's a name from a newspaper you read once, filed alongside a dozen other names that belong to the city you thought you were coming to. You're not thinking about reform legislation, you're thinking about the number in the ledger. $27.11 by the second Friday. $29.40 the week after that. The trajectory is slow enough to watch and fast enough to feel, like watching a water level rise in a basement, slow enough that you could convince yourself it might stop, fast enough that you can't pretend it isn't happening. The other girls have different relationships to the numbers. Nell's is rage, cold and controlled. She argues every charge. 25 cents for a broken glass. The one you didn't break, Nell says quietly across the table. I didn't break a glass this week. Clara meets her eyes. There was a glass. Show me the glass. Clara shows Nell something. Maybe a piece of glass, maybe not. It's not clear from where you're sitting. 25 cents, Clara says, and she writes it down. Nell's jaw tightens like she's biting something. She says nothing else. The 25 cents stays. The arguing costs too much. In energy, in goodwill, in something else you can't name but can see in the hollowing around Nell's eyes. Josephine's relationship to the numbers is something closer to resignation. She was a fighter once. She told you this one afternoon in the quiet time, sitting on the floor of the upstairs hallway with her back against the wall, in the particular way of people who have given up on chairs. Back in Cork, back in Boston, she was a fighter. Something about the house has not broken her exactly. More like taught her to fight in directions that don't cost so much. She fights for small things now. For an extra blanket when November comes and the rooms get cold. For the right to keep a book. She asked Clara once for permission to attend Sunday services at St. Patrick's 2 blocks away, and Clara said yes, which surprised everyone, including Josephine. Josephine goes to church every Sunday. You go with her, starting in November, because the street for those 2 blocks and back is the only sanctioned outdoor time that doesn't require an errand, and because the inside of St. Patrick's smells like stone and candle wax and is almost completely absent of gardenia perfume. The priest doesn't ask questions. He probably knows. He has opinions about what his female parishioners are or aren't doing the rest of the week, and he keeps them to himself with the practical theology of a man who understands that people who are this close to the edge still need somewhere to stand on Sunday mornings. You take communion, you stare at the windows, you go back. The girl who leaves. In November, a girl named Cecilia decides she's going to walk out. This is not uncommon. It happens probably in every house in the Levee District at some point. The understanding of the trap reaches a point where the fear of trying to escape feels smaller than the certainty of staying, and someone makes a decision, and then everyone else watches what happens. Cecilia is 21 from downstate Illinois, been here 5 months. Her ledger balance is $52. She has family in Quincy, a sister, and she has spent 5 months writing letters in her head that she can't figure out how to send. On a Tuesday afternoon, when Clara is out, she goes out on Tuesday afternoons, regular as the clock, to an address nobody knows but everyone speculates about. Cecilia packs her things into a pillowcase and walks to the front door. You are in the sitting room when this happens. You see her cross the hallway with a pillowcase. You see her hand reach for the door. You also see Mary, the woman who handles the house during the hours when Clara is out, appear from the kitchen. Mary is Clara's age, heavier, slower, but with something in her face that makes you very still when she looks at you. She was a girl in a house like this once. You'll figure out later. It's the only way to explain the specific quality of her authority in this building, the way she knows exactly which levers to pull. Cecilia, Mary says. Cecilia doesn't stop. Her hand is on the door. You owe Clara $52. I'll send it, Cecilia says, and her voice is only shaking a little. From where? You've got no character reference. You've got the clothes on your back, which are Clara's clothes. You step out that door in Clara's clothes, and that's theft. Cecilia is wearing a shirtwaist and a dark skirt. They're not exceptional clothes. They're not worth $52, but they're in the ledger. I'll leave the clothes, Cecilia says. A pause. She doesn't leave the clothes. She can't, practically. What would she walk out in, her underclothes? But the offer hangs there for a moment. Mary says something quiet. You can't hear it from the sitting room. You're not supposed to hear it. Cecilia comes back inside. She doesn't cry. That's the thing you remember. She comes back in, and she sits down on the horsehair sofa in the parlour, and she folds her hands in her lap, and she sits there for a long time, very still, while the house moves around her. That evening at supper she eats everything on her plate. She doesn't try again, not while you're there. Whether she ever tries again, or what happens to her, you won't know. You'll be gone before you find out. December comes. The World's Fair has closed. The last of the 27 million visitors has gone home. The White City is dark. The Midway Plaisance, where George Ferris built his wheel, and where Little Egypt danced, and where the concessions sold $50 million worth of food and souvenirs over the summer, dark. The city is contracting back to its normal size, shedding the visitors, the temporary workers, the women who came to Chicago to work the fair and are now looking for what comes next. Some of them end up in the levee, not just from the fair. The city is full in the winter of 1893 of people who came looking for something and didn't find it. The Depression, the Panic of 1893, which started in the spring and has been grinding down through the economy ever since, is beginning to show in Chicago the way it shows in all industrial cities. In the lines outside employment offices, in the evictions from boarding houses, in the men selling apples on corners who were working in factories 6 months ago. Women's options in an economic depression are, in 1893, extremely limited. The jobs that women are allowed to have, domestic service, dressmaking, laundry, factory work in certain specific industries, are the first to cut wages when times are tight and the last to raise them when times improve. A woman who loses her domestic position in December of 1893 has approximately nothing between her and the streets. Clara Walsh's house is, in December of 1893, doing well. You understand this with a particular bitterness that has no clean outlet. The worse things are outside, the better things are in here. The girls in the house are better fed than the women in the breadlines 3 neighbourhoods over. The rooms are heated. There is no question of where tomorrow's meal is coming from. This is also part of the trap. It's not glamorous, but it's not starvation. And the distance between comfortable enough and starving is, in a depression winter, a distance that matters. The ledger at the end of December says $31.70. You've been here 3.5 months and you are $8 further in debt than when you arrived. Rose Kaplan teaches you chess in December. She learned from her father, in the small apartment on the west side where her family lives. 5 people in 2 rooms. Her father working 12 hours a day in the needle trades for wages that are falling, because everyone's wages are falling. She plays with the intensity of someone for whom strategy is not an abstract game, but a way of thinking about the world. She has a board. She brought it with her when she came here, which means she knew in advance, or suspected, or was trying to hold on to something. The board is small, the pieces worn smooth, carved from wood that was once painted black and white and is now mostly grey. You play in the afternoons, in the quiet hours before the house opens. You're not good at it. You lose consistently in a way that tells you something about how you think. You see the immediate threat, the obvious move, and respond to that. And meanwhile, Rose is doing something 3 moves ahead that you don't see until it's too late. You're reacting, she tells you one afternoon, setting up the pieces again. Stop reacting and start planning. Easy to say. It's not easy to do, but it's the only thing that works. You play another game. You lose again. But in this game, you hold on for longer. You see one of the 3 moves ahead patterns before it completes. Rose raises an eyebrow. Better, she says. In the evenings, downstairs, she teaches Josephine to read. This takes longer than chess, requires more patience, but Rose has patience that seems inexhaustible. Josephine came from Cork in a hurry, left school at 12 to help at home, crossed the Atlantic at 17, and has been in motion ever since with no time to sit down with a book and figure out the words. By December she can read a newspaper headline, slowly, with her finger under the words, sounding them out. Rose sits beside her with the patience of a very old teacher in a very young body. The piano plays downstairs. James Delaney, working his way through a ragtime piece that has too many notes in it, finding the notes anyway. January. The cold in Chicago in January is a different animal from the cold in Wisconsin. Colder, technically. The lake effect. The wind off Lake Michigan. The way the grid of streets funnels the air into corridors of moving ice. But also a different quality of cold. The urban cold, which has no fields or forests to break it. Just the straight-line streets and the brick buildings funneling the wind, and you in the middle of it. The window in your room faces north. In January, it might as well be a piece of ice set into the wall. You wake in the mornings with the blanket pulled up to your chin, and you can see your breath, and the water in the glass on the nightstand has a thin skin of ice on it. Clara Walsh heats the downstairs. She heats it properly, coal furnace, the parlour warm enough for the business, the upstairs less so. The 3rd floor, where your room is, relies on whatever heat makes it up from the floors below. which in January is not enough. You learn to sleep in layers, all your clothing, everything you own, piled on top of the blanket. The corset goes last. You can't sleep in a corset, it's physically impossible, so it goes on top of the pile like a strange piece of armour. Josephine's room is across the hall. In the worst of January you sleep in the same bed, back to back for warmth. You don't discuss this. It's not a thing that requires discussion. It's cold. There are two of you. The arithmetic is simple. The cold outside keeps more customers away. The business is slower in January. Clara acknowledges this in a single sentence at the Friday accounting. Winter is slower. And she adjusts nothing. The room and board stays at $4. The clothing charges continue. The incidentals accumulate. Your balance at the end of January is $34.20. In February, Margaret gets sick. Not the cough. The cough has been there since you arrived. Something worse that starts as a fever and becomes something in her lungs that the doctor Clara calls in, prescribes something for, and bills at $3.50 to Margaret's account. You sit with her sometimes in the afternoons, bring her water. Talk about nothing in particular. The weather, the neighbourhood, a story you half heard on Sunday at St. Patrick's. She's too tired to read. She lies in her bed with the blanket pulled up and talks in a voice that's rougher than before, and tells you things in the way that sick people sometimes tell things, without preamble, because they've stopped waiting for the right moment. She came from Ohio, a town you've heard of but couldn't place on a map. Her mother is alive, she thinks. Her father died in a factory accident when she was 14. She came to Chicago at 16. She did not come through an employment agency. She came with a man who told her he loved her and brought her here and deposited her with Clara, Walsh, and took a fee, and she has not seen him since. This is a different entry point, not the employment agency route, the sweetheart route, which is what the investigators at Hull House will later call it. The technique of romantic attachment used to move girls from places they know to places they don't. Different mechanism, same destination. 3 years, she says one afternoon. She's looking at the ceiling. 3 years and $48. I counted once. You don't say anything. I stopped counting, she says. Outside, a horse goes by on the frozen street. Hooves on ice, a sound like knuckles on wood. Does it? You start and then stop because you don't know how to finish the sentence. Does it get easier? Does the math eventually change? Does something happen that... No, Margaret says. She knows what you were going to ask. No, it doesn't. The horse passes. The street goes quiet. But something's happened, she says. Just not the thing you think is going to happen. You don't ask her what she means. Later, you'll think you should have. Later, you'll think she was trying to tell you something specific, and you didn't push hard enough to hear it. I want to explain something about the legal situation, because it's important for understanding why the trap worked as well as it did. In 1893 in Chicago, prostitution is not technically legal. It operates in the Levee District under a system of unofficial tolerance. The police collect fees, the aldermen collect protection money, the district effectively governs itself with the tacit approval of the city's democratic machine. It is what historians call a segregated district, officially illegal, practically tolerated, as long as it stays in its designated geography. This means that the women in Clara Walsh's house are, legally speaking, criminals. This is the secondary trap beneath the debt trap. If you go to the police, you are confessing to your own criminality. If you go to a court, you are the defendant, not the plaintiff. The system is designed so that the only person in the entire equation who can credibly approach law enforcement is the madam herself, who has paid for that credibility and uses it accordingly. There are escape routes. There are always escape routes, even if they're narrow. The mission houses, religious organisations, the Florence Crittenton Mission, the Salvation Army, run residential programs for women trying to leave the houses. These are imperfect, often condescending, invested in a narrative of fallen women and redemption that requires you to perform a certain kind of penitence to receive help. But they exist. They will take you in. They will not turn you away because of the debt in Clara Walsh's ledger. The problem is getting to them. The problem is always getting to them. The night you get out starts with a fire, not at the house, somewhere else. 3 blocks north, in February, a boarding house that catches from a faulty gas line. The fire company comes, the streets fill with people, the ordinary controlled geography of the Levee District, who goes where, who is visible, who controls what space, breaks down for about 45 minutes while everyone watches the building burn. Clara Walsh is out that evening. Mary is downstairs managing things. The customers who are in the house leave, because fire, because crowd, because whatever risk calculation applies. James Delaney stops playing. The house is quiet for the first time in the 5 months you've been here, and something, not a plan. You didn't have a plan. Something makes you put on your coat and go downstairs and walk out the front door while Mary is at the window watching the smoke. Rose is behind you. You didn't know she was coming until she's there. You don't say anything to each other. You just walk. North toward the fire, because the fire is where the crowd is, and the crowd is cover, and the cover is the only thing you have. The street is extraordinary. People from every building on the block are out. Families in nightclothes, men in overcoats, children who should be asleep being held up to see the fire, which is vivid orange in the February dark, crackling and high, the building already a skeleton. You stand in the crowd and watch. The cold is ferocious. Somewhere in the range of 10 degrees, maybe less. The heat from the fire reaches you in waves, intense, close, then gone, then back. The skin of your face is simultaneously cold and hot. Snow on the ground, compacted to ice on the street. Cold coming up through the soles of your shoes. Rose takes your arm. Hull House, she says, very quietly, very close to your ear. What? Hull House, on Halstead. 14 blocks. You look at her. I know the way, she says. It's 10 degrees. You're in the shoes and the coat that are in Clara Walsh's ledger. You have no money. You have no identification, no character reference. Nothing that will help you at the other end of those 14 blocks except 2 names, Jane Addams and Hull House, and the particular desperation that is in this moment, burning as hot as the building across the street. 14 blocks. Yes, you say. You walk. I want to tell you what 14 blocks in Chicago in February 1893 at 10 degrees actually feels like. Because the distance sounds trivial, and the feeling is not. The cold is immediate and total. It enters through the thin soles of your shoes within the first block and works upward. Your feet go from cold to numb over roughly half a mile. Your hands, in gloves that are adequate for walking to church on Sunday, are useless by block 4. The cold gets inside the gloves and settles and stays. The wind. Chicago's wind in February comes off the lake, and it is not metaphorical. It is not a literary device. It hits you in the face like a physical thing, like someone holding a piece of ice against your skin. It finds the gaps in your coat. the button third from the top that has a small gap where the button is slightly loose, and drives through. You pull your collar up, you walk fast as you can without attracting attention, because two women walking fast through the Levee District at 10 o'clock at night in February are not an unusual sight, but running would be. Rose walks beside you and slightly ahead. She knows the streets. She's been outside more than you. Errands, sometimes, and a quality of attention to the city that suggests she's been mapping it mentally since the day she arrived. Left here, she says. You go left. The streets change as you move north and west. The levee gives way to neighbourhoods that are simply poor rather than specifically transgressive. Tenements, small storefronts, the particular smell of the working class near West Side in winter. Coal smoke and cabbage and the cold itself, which in a city smells different than in the country. Thicker, more mineral. Your feet are not really feet anymore. They are two numb facts at the end of your legs that you move because the alternative is not moving. Block 8, Block 10, Block 12. Rose is not breathing hard. She grew up walking these distances. The cold doesn't seem to touch her the same way. She moves through it with a briskness that looks like practice. 2 more, she says. You nod. Your jaw is too cold to speak properly. Block 13, Block 14. And there it is. Hull House is from the outside, not what you expected. You expected. You don't know exactly what you expected. Something institutional. Something that looked like rescue. What it looks like is a large brick building on a corner, with lights in most of the windows and a small sign by the door and a sense of ordinary activity inside. People moving, a light in what looks like a large front room. Voices, muffled. Rose pushes open the door without knocking. Inside, a woman at a desk looks up. She's maybe 25. Dark hair, ink on her fingers, the look of someone who was in the middle of writing something and has been interrupted before but is determined to be patient about it. "Can I help you?" Rose says, in a voice that is steady in a way that tells you it's costing her something. "We need help leaving a house on South Dearborn Street." The woman at the desk looks at you, then at Rose, then at you again. She puts her pen down. "Come in," she says. "Close the door behind you. I'll get someone." I'm going to pause here and tell you what Hull House actually does for women like you, because the history matters, and because the outcome is neither the miracle you hoped for, nor the disaster Clara Walsh implied. Hull House, in 1893, operates a lodging house for women. Clean beds, meals. No questions about what you were doing before you came here, or at least fewer questions than other places. They are connected, through networks of reformers and church women and investigators, to employment agencies that are what the Western Ladies Bureau claim to be. They cannot erase the debt in Clara Walsh's ledger. That is not something they can do. The debt is real, in the sense that Clara Walsh will consider it real and will act accordingly. If you go back, you will be in debt. If you don't go back, she will tell the police you stole her clothes, which are in the ledger, which means you are technically a thief. This can be navigated. Other girls have navigated it. The mission workers know the police, or the ones who matter, or they know people who know the police, and they understand how to make certain things not become problems. But it takes time, and it takes humility, and it takes the particular patience of someone who is being helped on terms that aren't entirely their own. The woman from the desk, whose name is Eleanor, brings you tea. She brings you a pair of dry socks because your feet when you get your shoes off are alarming. She gets someone else. older, quieter, who sits down across from you and asks, in the careful way of someone who has done this before, "What happened?" You tell her. Not everything, not right away. There are things you do not want to say to a stranger in a warm room with tea in your hands, things that will take longer than one night to become sayable. But enough. She listens without interrupting. When you stop talking, she's quiet for a moment. "You can stay here tonight," she says. "We'll talk more in the morning about what comes next." You look at Rose. Rose is looking at her hands. She's not said anything since the front door, since we need help. She's sitting very straight in her chair, the way she sits when she's holding herself together by structure. "Both of us, you say?" "Both of you," the woman agrees. "That night you sleep in a room with 4 other women. The room is clean. The beds are narrow, but they are beds, and the blankets are adequate, and the window, when you look at it before you sleep, shows the street outside. Ordinary, dark, the lamp on the corner making a circle of yellow in the cold. You sleep. You don't dream about the house. You dream about the farm, which surprises you when you wake up and remember it. The fields in July. The smell of cut hay. Your brother's voice calling from somewhere you can't see. Morning comes grey and Chicago and cold. Rose is already awake when you open your eyes. She's sitting up in her bed with her hands in her lap, and she's looking at nothing in particular, with the expression of someone who is doing arithmetic. "Are you all right?" you ask. She considers this. "I don't know yet," she says. "Ask me again in a month." The days at Hull House are structured in a way that is, after the house on South Dearborn Street, almost disorienting in its normalcy. Breakfast at 7. Not oatmeal and ledger, not the Friday morning accounting, just breakfast. Then, for the women who are here and well and trying to find employment, time in the front office with Eleanor or one of the other workers, going through the employment listings, writing letters of application, preparing to go out. It is boring. It is wonderful. It is the most tedious, hopeful thing you've done in months. Eleanor finds you a position within 2 weeks. A household in Hyde Park, the neighbourhood south of downtown. Respectable, university families. A family named Harrison. Husband a professor. Wife managing 3 children and a large house. They need a cook. $2 a week. Room and board. Sundays off. It is exactly what you thought you were getting in September when you walked into the Western Ladies Employment Bureau with $14 sewn into your underclothes. You will be starting from 0. Less than 0. You have no savings, no references from the past 6 months that you can use. Only the letter from the Hull House worker and the recommendation of Eleanor, who knows the Harrison family and knows they will not ask too many questions about the gap in your history. The Harrison household is on a tree-lined street in Hyde Park. The house is 3 stories, wood frame, well maintained. Mrs. Harrison is 34, brisk, not unkind. The kitchen is in the basement, large, with a proper stove and a pump for water, and a work table big enough to actually work at. You will sleep in a room on the top floor, small but warm, a window facing east that will catch the morning light. No wallpaper with blue roses, no piano, no ledger. Let me tell you what happened to the girls who stayed. Not all of them. I don't have all. They're stories. The historical record has the shape of all historical records of women who are poor and vulnerable and mostly invisible to the institutions that kept records. Partial, scattered, reconstructible only in fragments. Josephine Reardon from Cork by way of Boston. She gets out. Not immediately, not in 1893, she stays another 2 years, and then she goes through the Florence Crittenton mission. and then she goes to work in a laundry on the West Side, and she writes to her brother in Boston, and he writes back eventually. She never tells anyone in her later life what those 3 years were. Not her children, not her priest, not the sister-in-law who will wonder until she dies why Josephine sometimes goes very quiet when certain things are said. Nell Bradshaw from downstate Illinois. Nell figures it out. She figures it out the hard way, which is to say she reaches the specific cold clarity that comes when you've been angry for long enough that the anger turns into something functional. She starts undercounting the fine report, small discrepancies, a broken glass that she disputes so consistently and so calmly that Clara eventually stops citing it. She works the numbers with the patient attention she always brought to them, and over 2 years she closes the gap by increments, and she walks out owing $11 that she pays over 3 months in installments through a lawyer at Hull House who has decided this is worth his time. She goes to work as a bookkeeper's assistant. She's very good at it. Rose Kaplan. Rose, who walked 14 blocks in February without seeming to notice the cold, who plays chess 3 moves ahead and teaches literacy with the patience of a saint, and came here speaking 4 languages. Rose does not stay at Hull House. She goes back to her family on the West Side. Her father is not happy. Her mother doesn't speak to her for 6 months. The neighbourhood has its own vocabulary for what happened to Rose, and it is not kind. What happens after that you don't fully know. You lose track of her after Hyde Park. You will hear years later third hand that she is involved in labour organising on the West Side, something connected to the garment workers, something that is going to matter. You hope it's true. Margaret, who was there 3 years when you arrived and told you that some things happen, just not the thing you think is going to happen. Margaret's story ends in a way that you don't learn until you've been in Hyde Park for 6 months and run into Nell on a street near the University of Chicago, and she tells you a simple sentence. The kind of sentence that doesn't need embellishment because the thing itself is already as plain and terrible as it needs to be. The cough became something else. Clara Walsh sent for the doctor, eventually. The doctor came, eventually. It was too late, eventually. Her family in Ohio was notified. You don't know if they came. You don't know what name was on the record, if there was a record. You don't know where she's buried. You know she was 27, and she'd been there 3 years, and the last number she counted in the ledger was $48. You know she was from Ohio, and she played piano a little, and she had a habit of pressing her thumbnail into the pad of her index finger when she was thinking. You know the names of things she liked, and the name of the town she came from, and that she had her mother's eyes. Or so she said. That has to be enough. It's not enough. It has to be. Clara Walsh continues to operate on South Dearborn Street until 1908, when the reform movement finally builds enough political pressure to force the First Ward machine to allow a real crackdown. The Second Ward Vice Report, the Vice Commission's investigation, the newspapers that spend the 1900s documenting what everyone already knows, they create a cumulative pressure that even Hinky Dink and Bathhouse John can't fully redirect. She doesn't go to jail. Almost none of the madams go to jail. That's not how the crackdown works. What happens is the district is broken up, not eliminated, moved, dispersed. The vice scatter across the city into smaller, less organised, less visible arrangements. Clara Walsh retires. She has over 20 years in the business been careful with money. She moves to a quieter address. She lives, as far as anyone can tell, a perfectly respectable life for another 15 years, attending church, maintaining a small circle of women friends, dying in 1923 of pneumonia at the age of 82. Her ledger books are not preserved. She was, in her own understanding of herself, a businesswoman. The debt was real in her accounting. It was always real. Hyde Park, 1893. October becoming November. The trees on the street outside the Harrison house going orange and then yellow and then bare. The leaves in the gutter, the smell of them. Wet leaves on cold pavement. The particular smell of a Midwestern autumn winding down. You are cooking. This is what you do. Breakfast for 5, lunch for the children, dinner for the whole household, the endless productive labour of keeping people fed. Your hands are always doing something. The texture of flour between your palms, working it into dough, the pressure and push of it, the dough resisting and then yielding elastic and warm, the weight of a cast iron pan, the heat coming off the stove, the hiss of butter hitting the pan and then the smell, the good fundamental smell of butter browning. Your hands are cracked from the work and the cold water from the pump. There's a callus forming on your right palm from the knife handle. You rub lard into your hands at night and wrap them in rags, and in the morning they're a little better. The kitchen is below street level. Through the small windows at ceiling height, you can see the feet of people walking by. Boots, mostly, this time of year. Sometimes a dog. Once, memorably, a child who squatted down to look through the window at you, eye level, solemn as an owl, until her mother pulled her away. You cook, you wash, you organise. You're good at this, you discover, and better than you expected. Something about the kitchen suits you. The logic of it, the cause and effect. You do this, therefore this happens. You add heat, things change. You're careful, things come out well. It is boring. It is the best possible thing. Mrs. Harrison is not effusive. She is fair, which is its own kind of warmth. She pays on time. She says thank you for dinner. On Sunday mornings she leaves a newspaper in the kitchen on her way to church, which you did not ask for and she does not mention. You read every word of it. The foreign dispatches, the crime reports, the social columns, the advertisements. You send money home in December. Not much. Been saving for 3 months and it amounts to $4.60. Money that represents enough pride and enough hope that the arithmetic of it makes you sit down at the kitchen table for a while before you put it in the envelope. Your father writes back. His handwriting is large and sprawling and not entirely accurate in its spelling. He says they're getting along. He says your brother is tall. He says come home when you can. You fold the letter very small and put it in your coat pocket where it will stay until it falls apart. The Friday accounting. I keep coming back to it because it's the centre of the trap, the mechanism of it, the thing that when you understand it, you understand what the system actually was and how it worked and why it worked, as well as it did for as long as it did. On Friday mornings, across kitchen tables and parlour tables and sitting room tables, in every house in the Levee District, and in every establishment in every vice district in every American city of the 1890s, women sit across from ledger books and learn that they are further behind than they were last week. This is not a glitch in the system. It is the feature. The Vice Commission of Chicago, when they investigate in 1910 and produce their report, will find that the average inmate, their word, which is itself a statement about how they understood the situation, earns somewhere between $400 and $600 a year and pays out $450 to $650 in house charges. The average tenure in one of the downtown houses is 2 years. Some women are there for 10 or 15 years. You've seen what that looks like. You've sat beside it. You know what 3 years does to a person's relationship with the number in the ledger, the slow way it hollows out a certain quality of hope. Not the hope that keeps you waking up every morning, but the specific hope that things might change in a particular direction. The Commission also notes, in language that is careful and measured and trying to be sympathetic while also being clinical, the women most vulnerable to recruitment are between 16 and 24, most commonly arriving in the city within the past year, most commonly from rural areas or recent immigration, most commonly without family connections in the city. They note that the majority come through employment agencies. They recommend licensing employment agencies. They recommend a system of registration that would. Reader, the recommendations are reasonable. The recommendations are implemented partially eventually after several more reform campaigns and several more decades of girls whose names are not in any record finding themselves at breakfast tables with ledger books across from them and numbers that grow. The reforms work. Partially, eventually. The employment agencies are regulated. The police protection for the vice districts becomes politically untenable. The houses close or move or change their shape. The desperation that made the trap possible in the first place, the narrow range of options for young women without education or connections or capital in a labour market that valued their work at less than sustenance, that takes longer, much longer. Some would say it's not finished yet. But we're not there yet. We're in Chicago in 1893 and it's November, and you're in a kitchen in Hyde Park and the bread is rising. Spring. Chicago in spring is an argument with winter. Winter in the lakefront city gives up reluctantly. March is a negotiation. April makes promises that April can't always keep. But eventually, some morning in late April or early May, the air comes off the lake smelling of something other than cold, something green and possible, the beginning of things. The bread rises. The fires in the houses die down. The streets soften. You walk to the market in the morning with a basket and the Harrison household shopping list, and the particular freedom of having a purpose and a destination, and money in your pocket that is yours. The money is yours. This is still extraordinary. 4 months out of the house on South Dearborn Street, and the weight of it, the solidity of coins in your hand that you have earned and that belong to you, and that you will decide what to do with. It's still extraordinary. You think it probably won't always feel this way. You think probably at some point it will simply be the ordinary texture of a day, like the weight of the market basket or the sound of your own feet on the pavement. You're looking forward to that day, the day when your own money is ordinary. The market on 55th Street is spread across a wide block. Produce and meat and fish and the first spring flowers, lilies, daffodils, the bulbs that have been waiting underground through Chicago's winter and have now, with typical Midwestern stubbornness, decided to exist. You buy what you need, a bunch of carrots, a good piece of pork shoulder, new potatoes that are the first of the season, small and smooth in your hand, still carrying the damp earth smell of where they came from. You buy a bunch of daffodils that are not on the list. 2 cents. You put them in a glass on the kitchen windowsill where the light comes through and they glow, yellow against the grey Chicago morning. Mrs. Harrison, coming down for breakfast, sees them. She doesn't say anything, but she pauses for 1 second and looks at them, and there's something in her face, just for a moment before she composes herself back into the brisk household manager, something that looks like pleasure. You go back to the stove. The bread is browning. The house smells like yeast and spring. Let me tell you about the numbers that aren't in any ledger. The Vice Commission's 1910 report estimates 60,000 women in Chicago involved in prostitution in some capacity. Other estimates from other investigators in other cities suggest that in the United States at the turn of the century, the number of women involved in commercial prostitution at any given moment is somewhere between 200 and 500,000. These are estimates. The precision is approximate. What the numbers don't capture, the girls who went home, who left Chicago or St. Louis or New York or New Orleans with no money and no references, and got on a train and went back to the farm or the town or the neighborhood and told no one, or told their mother or told their priest or told nobody ever in their entire lives. The girls who married, who found some man who didn't ask too many questions and built a life on the other side of the experience, who went to church every Sunday and helped in the school and baked at the fundraisers and whose children never knew. The girls who had children of their own, whose children grew up and went to school and became teachers, nurses, factory workers, secretaries, mothers themselves. The girls who wrote things down, private diaries, most of them lost, letters that were burned or buried or simply not preserved, because the people who possessed them had no reason to think the historical record required their specific grief. Occasionally one survives. The researchers at the University of Chicago will collect oral histories in the 1920s and 1930s. The women they interview are in their 40s and 50s by then. Some of them talk about the Levy years, some of them don't. The ones who do use a particular kind of language, spare, factual, stripped of drama, that is recognizable to anyone who's ever watched someone describe a thing they have decided not to feel about anymore. I was in a house on Dearborn Street for about 2 years, one of them says. Then I left. 2 years in the debt trap, in the piano house, in the rooms with the peeling wallpaper and the water that freezes in January in the Friday accounting. And then I left. The distance between those two things, 2 years, and then I left, contains more human experience than the sentence can carry. But the women who survived were the ones who found a way to hold it in a sentence, who learned to put it behind them in the specific way that involves acknowledging it exists and then walking in the other direction. Then I left. You're 20 years old in May of 1894. You've been in Hyde Park for 8 months. You've saved $22. You've sent 4 installments of money home to Wisconsin. You've learned to make bread that Mrs. Harrison's husband calls on a Thursday evening the best bread he has ever eaten, which is probably not true, but which you accept with appropriate modesty. You've written to Rose Kaplan at an address on the west side that you got from Eleanor at Hull House. You have not received a reply. You have written again. On a Sunday afternoon in May, your day off, you walk to the lakefront. Hyde Park sits right on the edge of Lake Michigan. 5 minutes east of the Harrison house and you're on the shore, the lake stretching out in front of you to a horizon that is, if you look straight at it and not north or south, indistinguishable from the horizon of the ocean. You've never seen the ocean. You may never see the ocean. But this is large enough. The lake in May is still cold. The surface temperature of Lake Michigan in May is somewhere around 50 degrees, and on a day when the wind comes off the water it carries that cold with it, straight and clean and sharp. You sit on a rock near the water. The waves are small today. A low chopping rhythm, the water grey-green and clear near the edge. Deeper blue-grey further out. Chicago to your left, the smoke from its chimneys still visible even on a Sunday. The industrial metabolism of the city never fully stopping. The White City Fairgrounds to your left too, where the buildings are already being demolished. The Columbian Exposition is over. The future is over. The dream of the fair is being disassembled into lumber and scrap. To the right, south, the shore curving away. Quieter. The beginning of distance. In front of you, the lake. You've been sitting here for maybe half an hour when you take out the letter. Not the one from your father. That one is still in your coat pocket, gone soft along the folds. This one is new, arrived yesterday, from Waukesha County. Your mother's handwriting, which is small and careful, nothing like your father's sprawl. She says your father's knee is better this spring. She says your brother has grown 3 inches. She says she's been thinking about you every day. She says, "Come home when you're ready, Emma. There's no rush. But come home when you're ready. Come home when you're ready." You fold the letter back. The lake makes its small waves. The wind is cold. You're 20 years old. You have $22 saved. You have a reference from Mrs. Harrison that says Emma Hartley is a capable, honest cook of good character, and which does not mention 6 months that Mrs. Harrison does not know about. You are not ready yet. You don't know when you'll be ready. But you think about Wisconsin, the fields in July, the smell of hay, your brother who is probably asking if you brought him a souvenir from the fair. You didn't get to the fair, you got something else instead, something harder to describe and harder to carry and harder to set down again. The lake is cold and large and indifferent in the specific, liberating way of very large natural things. You breathe. Before I let you sleep, I want to tell you one more thing. In 1910, the Vice Commission of Chicago submits its report to the mayor. It is 630 pages long. It documents the debt trap, the employment agency fraud, the corruption of the police protection system, the conditions in the houses, the health outcomes, the legal mechanisms that make escape difficult. It recommends wholesale reform. The mayor thanks the commission. He does not implement the recommendations. The newspapers write about the report for approximately 2 weeks. Then the newspapers write about something else. And the houses continue, and the ledgers continue, and the Friday accounting continues. But also, the Hull House investigators continue. They build the case for employment agency licensing, which eventually passes. Jane Addams continues doing what Jane Addams does, which is look directly at the worst things and document them and refuse to look away, and eventually, if not this year, then the next year or the year after, make them slightly harder to do to people. Florence Kelly continues fighting for labour protections that will, eventually, partially, incompletely, change the conditions that make the trap possible in the first place. The women who survived continue getting up in the morning and sending money home and baking bread and teaching their children to read and organising labour unions and writing things down in private diaries and sometimes in public records and sometimes in the conversations they have with each other in the quiet afternoons when no one else is listening. Then I left. 2 words that contain everything. Now. The lake is far away. The smoke from Chicago's stockyards, the horse dung and the coal and the specific grit of a 1,000,000-person city grinding along. All of that is far away. You're here, warm, whatever room you're in, Wherever your night has landed you, you're here. The noise of the day is settling. The things that needed attention, the things that kept pulling at you, the list of what you didn't finish. Let it wait. It will still be there. Everything that needs to be handled will be there, intact and manageable when you're ready. You've been carrying things today, maybe longer than today. The kind of carrying that you don't notice until you stop moving, and then it's in your shoulders, in your jaw, in the slight tension behind your eyes. Let it down. You don't have to solve anything tonight. Nobody is coming to show you a ledger. Nothing is owed. Think about Emma Hartley, 20 years old, sitting on a rock by Lake Michigan in May of 1894. The cold coming off the water, the city to the left smoking and grinding and alive, the letter in her pocket. She doesn't know yet what's coming. Nobody ever does. But she's breathing. She's here. She made it through the worst winter of her life, and she's sitting by the lake with the wind in her face and $22 saved, and a letter from her mother that says, "Come home when you're ready." Breathe. The way she breathed on that rock, the way the air came off the water clean and cold. You've earned rest. Not in the way Clara Walsh used that word. Not as a transaction. Not as something balanced against what you owe. Just rest. Because you're human, and humans need it. And there's no ledger that records this particular debt, and no Friday accounting for the hours of sleep you take. This is yours. Let the sounds around you go soft. The ones in the building, the pipes settling, the distant sound of something. The sounds outside, whatever your night contains of traffic or wind or the particular ambient murmur of wherever you are. Let them become background. Let them become the lake. Small waves, a low chopping rhythm. Cold and clean and very old. The lake older than the city by a long measure. Older than any human accounting. The water there when the ice came, and there when the ice retreated, and there now, indifferent and enormous, and somehow, because of its size, reassuring. You're warm enough, you're fed enough, you're safe enough. That's more than a lot of people have had. That's enough for tonight. Tomorrow will come with its ordinary requirements. Morning and coffee and the list of things and the people and the noise. Tomorrow will ask things of you. But that's tomorrow. Right now there's just this. The breath going in. The breath going out. The slow drift. The same drift that took Emma Hartley in Hyde Park, in her small warm room, in the spring of 1894, after the worst year of her life and the first spring on the other side of it. The same drift that takes us all, eventually, when the day is done and the carrying is set down and the dark is the right kind of dark. The kind that means rest, not danger. The kind that means morning is coming. Let it come. Let sleep find you the way it found her, in a room that was modest and plain and entirely completely hers. Let the sounds soften. Let the thoughts slow. Let the breath deepen. Down, down. The lake is cold and wide and constant. The bread rises in the morning. The letter says, "Come home when you're ready." You're getting there. Good night.